Hi, this is Amber Satterthwaite, Curator of Education and Museum Programs here at Drayton Hall. And today I'm here to talk with you about a man named Seaboy, who was someone who Charles Drayton wrote about pretty frequently in his diaries. And Seaboy's story is unique, and his story has several important factors of the lifeways of an enslaved person living here at Drayton Hall, including resistance attempts, receiving medical care, and just the violence and potential danger that existed for people who were held in bondage in a slave society. The first time Seaboy appeared in Charles's writings was in 1777 when Charles wrote about him in his medical journals. Charles was trained as a physician. He did provide medical care to people, but he made most of his money as a planter, as an owner of these large-scale commercial farms. But in this entry, he wrote about treating Seaboy for a recurring ailment. Seaboy had been trampled by something 7 years before then, so around 1770. Seaboy had an accident in which he was trampled, and Charles said it left him with what Charles referred to as asthma that would come upon him in the summer and the winter, when Seaboy would have these horrible coughing spells for weeks at a time. He would be so sick with these coughing spells that he could not lie down. He had to sit up all night. Sometimes he couldn't sleep at all at night. He was coughing up blood and was in a very dangerous situation medically. So we know from that entry alone that Seaboy had this recurring illness that he was receiving medical treatment for from Charles. Now, several years later, Seaboy appeared in Charles's personal diaries. And Charles wrote about another event in which Seaboy presumably received medical care from him. Now, Seaboy's story is not a happy story, and unfortunately it becomes even less of a happy story now. In 1794, Seaboy was injured horrifically when a man who Charles referred to as a wandering overseer became drunk and cut off part of Seaboy's hand. Now, the fact that Charles called this man a wandering overseer sounds like this man was not employed by Charles. This man may or may not have known Seaboy. I don't know. Charles does not provide much information about this at all. Nor does Charles provide details about why this altercation occurred. All we know is that Seaboy was hurt by this man, and an overseer who worked for Charles, whose name was Casey, brought Seaboy here to Drayton Hall for Charles to provide medical care for him, or at least to bring it to Charles's attention. Now, this story is hard. It's a hard story to tell, but it illustrates the inherent violence that existed in this slave society, in which this man saw himself socially and legally as someone who was in a position of authority over Seaboy and injured him grievously. Seaboy is also someone who Charles wrote about pretty frequently, attempting to resist slavery by trying to run away from Charles's plantations, or maybe I should put it this way, trying to run to freedom or run to another place where he wanted to be, where he wanted to go. Charles wrote about Seaboy attempting to run away on a couple of different occasions, but the one I wanted to mention specifically was just a few years after Seaboy had been injured. Seaboy was working as a vice driver on one of Charles's plantations called Savannah. If you saw me talk about Billy, you'll remember that the driver was an enslaved man who really was in a position of a supervisory position on the plantation. Seaboy was working alongside a long-standing driver named Tom, and then he and Tom answered to the plantation's overseer. And Charles said that Seaboy ran away due to overseer's threats. Now, considering that just a few years prior to that, Seaboy had been hurt by someone who was an overseer, I don't think it's surprising that he would run away or attempt to remove himself from a situation in which he felt threatened by someone who was in that same position of authority. So clearly, Seaboy was trying to protect himself through this, and maybe trying to get to somewhere where he could be safe, or where he might receive freedom, or somewhere where he wanted to be. And that's the unfortunate thing about reading diaries like this, is that we are only getting part of the story. We're only getting the perspective that Charles was able to provide, and the observations that Charles had about the situation. But I hope that hearing Seaboy's story can kind of give you a little bit more insight into the life of at least one person, and how he was affected by the many factors at play in a slaveholding society here in South Carolina. Thanks, y'all. I'll see you next time.